Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jai Jai Shri Caitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jai Jai Shri Caitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jai Jai Shri Caitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Can somebody please read?
I can read.
Yes, please.
Ramanujan Acharya has discussed this point very nicely. One may argue, since there was only one absolute truth before the creation of this material world, how is it possible that the living entities emanated from him? If he were alone, how could he have produced or generated the infinitesimal living entities? In answer to this question, the Vedas state that everything is generated from the absolute truth. Everything is maintained by the absolute truth and annihilation. Everything enters after annihilation. Everything enters into the absolute truth. This statement from the Upanishads makes it clear that when the living entities are liberated, they enter into the supreme existence without changing their original constitutional position.
So the argument is that the Lord is alone, then how did he create us? But the answer is that we always exist. And when we are liberated, we just are in our liberated situation then. It's not that we don't exist. We exist eternally. That's the meaning of spiritual. Always existing. So when we get liberated, our position still remains the same. What's our constitutional position? Jivara Swarabhai Krishna Nitya Das. Our position always same. Like Krishna's position always same. Wherever he is, he is the absolute truth. His position never changes. And similarly, our position never changes. The only illusion is that we think that our position changes. We forget our position. That's the only thing. But forgetfulness of the position doesn't mean that our position actually changes. You know, we may forget. We may forget we may forget that some country exists, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. We just forgot it. You know, we forget so many things. It doesn't mean that that thing doesn't exist then. So,
We must always remember that the Supreme Lord has his creative function and that the infinitesimal living entities have their creative functions also. It is not that their creative function is lost when they are liberated and enter into the Supreme after the dissolution of the material body. On the contrary, the creative function of the living entity is properly manifested in the liberated state. If the living entity activities are manifest even when he is materially conditioned, then how it is possible for his activities to stop when he attains liberation? The living entities entering the state of liberation may be compared to a bird entering a tree, or an animal entering the forest, or a plane entering the sky. In no case are activities stopped.
you know, why we think activity stops after liberation is because we think we are the body. And we think that the activity is because of the body. So it's like baffling for us. What do you mean the soul also moves or what? Really? There is movement in the spiritual world? How can be? Because we are thinking we are the body. We have to understand we are not the body, we are the soul. And activity is actually with the soul, not with the body. Dead body never moves. It will be lying there. A building never moves. It can't move. We'll all run away. We might think there's a ghost or something possessed, right? If a chair suddenly starts moving. So activity is not with the material elements, it's with the body. I'm sorry, it's with the soul. So the soul also acts when the soul is liberated. So Prabhupada is giving this example, like a bird is entering a tree, especially if it's a green bird. And we see the bird entering the tree. And we think, oh, now the bird is no more. Now it's become the tree. Is that the truth? Or are we being foolish?
We are being foolish.
Yeah. So thinking that the soul is not going to be existing anymore, it's going to merge and no more soul, then that's our foolishness. Because spiritual means eternal, ever existing. Krishna is saying in Bhagavad Gita. So activities are never stopped. Plane entering the sky, Prabhupada is giving very appropriate examples. So we may no longer be able to see the plane. Doesn't mean the plane has become the sky, right? It's just we can't see it. Plane is there, still moving in the sky. Or animal is entering the forest, we cannot see the animal anymore. Doesn't mean that the animal has become the forest. Like, when somebody is going to another room. So because we can't see them, we say, oh, that person has become the room. No, right? So that's what we are trying to understand.
But then this is very sad that most of the people are aspiring for mukti.
Yes.
Most of them, like even in a lot of dharmas, they are aspiring for this only, that हमें बस मुक्ति मिल जाए, बस मुक्ति मिल जाए, अभी हो गया बस बहुत, अब मुक्ति चाहिए.
Yeah, but why do we say that? Why? Because we get so frustrated of this material world that we want to put an end to our existence. Because dealing with the material world is frustrating. There's so much misery and suffering. So we think, once I get liberated, then I don't need to exist anymore. But the correct way to think is, yes, we don't want to suffer. Let me go to the spiritual world and act. I still remain an individual and I'm very happy in the spiritual world and I do all sorts of activities there. That's the correct understanding.
But even after mukti, you will still have your individuality, right? Even if you
Yeah,
merge, your individuality is still there. But then it is
yeah,
not that you're in the spiritual world. You're just there. You don't have
in the
any
spiritual
connection with God.
sky.
Yeah, in
Yeah,
the
in the
spiritual sky,
spiritual
you have
sky.
connection. You are serving. But in the mukti, you have your individuality, but you are just there.
So that's what I'm saying. The mukti is sitting in the spiritual sky. There's no connection to Bhagwan, the Supreme Lord. So it's like floating in the sky.
So
It's
is it
like
also
that.
the spiritual? Is it also the spiritual sky when the mukti, or it
Yes.
is still the material world? No.
No, it's spiritual, Brahman, a spiritual
Oh,
sky.
Brahmajyoti.
But
Brahmajyoti. Hmm.
Brahmajyoti, yeah. But
Yeah,
because the
yeah.
soul cannot be
Hmm.
flying too much, floating for too long, need some activity, need to do something. So the
Hmm.
soul will get bored. How long will they be in that position? Out of frustration, we say, I don't want to exist anymore. I want to just go sit in the Brahman. But how long can
Hmm.
we sit down? Same here, no? When we get too tired, we get frustrated. We say, I don't want to do anything. I'm just going to sit down. After we rested, again, we get up and do something or the other.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
same.
Okay.
Yeah.
When explaining the second aphorism of the Vedanta Sutra, Sankara has most unceremoniously tried to explain that Brahman or the Supreme Absolute Truth is impersonal. He has also cunningly tried to switch the doctrine of byproducts into the doctrine of change. For the Supreme Absolute Truth, there is no change. It is simply that a byproduct results from his inconceivable powers of action. In other words, a relative truth, a byproduct, is produced out of the Supreme Truth. For example, when a chair is produced out of crude wood, it is said that a byproduct is produced. That's the Supreme Absolute Truth, Brahman, is immutable. And when we find a byproduct, the living entity, or this cosmic manifestation, it is transformation of the Supreme's energy, Supreme energies, or a byproduct of the Supreme. It is like milk being transformed into yogurt. In this way, if we study the living entity in the cosmic manifestation, it will appear that they are not different from the original absolute truth. But from the Vedic literature, we understand that the absolute truth has varieties of energy, and that the living entities and the cosmic manifestation are but a demonstration of his energies. The energies are not separated from the energetic. Therefore, the living entity and cosmic manifestation are inseparable truths, parts of the absolute truth. Such a conclusion regarding the absolute truth and the relative truth should be acceptable to any sane man.
So the way to understand it is the absolute truth. He has many energies. Sun always has sunshine. Sunshine means there is sun. There is no meaning to sun without sunshine, no meaning to sunshine without sun. They always exist. But the sunshine is not equal to the sun. The heat and light of sunshine is very different than the heat and light coming from the sun itself. Similarly, we are the energies of the absolute truth. This material world is energy of the absolute truth. That's what we have to understand. We are not different, but yet different. This is what Lord Chaitanya's special contribution. Simultaneous one and difference. We are same in quality, but different in quantity. Quality same, Sachidananda, Sachidananda. Quantity, very different. Krishna is unlimited, we are tiny, minute. So this is
called the Bhed Abhed Tattva?
Yeah, Achintya Bheda Abheda Tattva.
Okay. Okay.
Achintya, inconceivable, simultaneous, one and different.
Okay, Achintya.
Hmm.
The Supreme Absolute Truth has his inconceivable potency, out of which this cosmic manifestation has been produced. In other words, the Supreme Absolute Truth supplies the ingredients, and the living entity and the cosmic manifestation are the byproducts. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, it is clearly stated, Yathova imami bhutani jayante. The absolute truth is the original reservoir of all the ingredients. And this material world and its living entities are products, are produced from those ingredients.
So we read in Bhagavatam how the elements are created by the Lord. You know, they always exist, the material elements. Also, the living entity is always existing. He's just putting us here. And then based on our desires and karma, we are getting the different types of bodies. So everything is coming actually from Krishna. We are coming from him. The material elements are coming from him. Everything is coming from him. That's how we can understand it. He is the cause of all causes. Sarva Karana Karanam.
Less intelligent persons who cannot understand this doctrine of byproducts cannot grasp how the cosmic manifestation and the living entities are simultaneously one with and different from the absolute truth. Not understanding this, one concludes that the doctrine of byproducts implies that the absolute truth itself is transformed. Unnecessarily fearing this, one then concludes that this cosmic manifestation and the living entities are false. Shankaracharya gives the example of a rope being mistaken for a snake, and sometimes the example of mistaking an oyster shell for gold is cited. But surely such arguments are ways of cheating. As mentioned in the Mandukya Upanishad, the example of mistaking a rope for a snake and an oyster shell for the gold have their proper applications and can be understood as follows. The living entity in his original constitutional position is pure spirit. When a human being identifies himself with a material body, his misidentification is like mistaking a rope for a snake or an oyster shell for gold. The doctrine of illusionary transformation of the state is accepted when one thing is mistaken for another. Actually, the body is not the living entity, but according to the doctrine of illusionary transformation of state, one accepts that body as the living entity. Every conditioned soul is undoubtedly contaminated by this doctrine of illusionary transformation of state.
So what is actually our illusion is that we think we are the body. That is our illusion. This material world is existing. Some people say Jagan Mithya, Brahman Satya, Jagan Mithya, that the material world is false. No, the material world is real. We are very much here. You know, what's going to happen if somebody stops us to go from the toilet? We are going to be really miserable. So we are very much inside the body. We cannot deny that. But the illusion is we are thinking we are the body. That is what is the illusion. Each of us in this material world, we are thinking we are the body. But what is the reality? That I am a spirit soul, part and parcel of Krishna. Right now I'm in this body. But I am a spirit soul, part and parcel of Krishna. This is the proper way to understand this example of illusion, as Mandukya Upanishad is explaining. Because some people think that, why this whole confusion arises is because trying to understand God without understanding that God has energies. Thinking that God is impotent, has no energy at all, has no powers, has no potency. And that's why all this confusion starts. But when we understand that God is omnipotent, means He has so many of these energies and they are wonderful, wonderful. They act in inconceivable ways. Everything becomes clear to understand. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. The conditioned state of the living entity is his diseased condition. Originally, the living entity and the original cause of this cosmic manifestation exist outside the state of transformation. But mistaken thoughts and arguments can overcome a person when he forgets the inconceivable energy of the Supreme Lord. Even in the material world, there are many examples of inconceivable energies. The sun has been producing unlimited energy from time immemorial, and so many byproducts result from the sun. Yet, there is no change in the heat and temperature of the sun itself. If the sun, despite being a material product, can maintain its original temperature and yet produce so many byproducts, is it difficult to understand that the supreme absolute truth remains unchanged in spite of producing so many byproducts by his inconceivable energy? Thus, there is no question of transformation as far as the Supreme Absolute Truth is concerned.
So again, the same point is trying to be explained here, that we understand that God has many, many inconceivable energies. Not that we think, oh, God is like paper and you cut him up, and so that's how we souls are born like that, and then there is no more God. No. Why are we mistaking God to be like ordinary paper? Why are we comparing God to paper? God exists, He has energies. Sun is existing, sunshine is existing. Both are existing. God is existing, we the living entities are existing. So it again is trying to explain to us that God has inconceivable energy. You know what happens if we say that, oh, God has no energy? That means we are trying to make him important, that, oh, he can't do anything. That means we are trying to say we are greater than God because we are doing so many things. We have a form, we are doing things, we are applying our energy, and then when it comes to God, we say, oh, he's like nothing, nothing happening. Then that's indirectly trying to say I'm greater than God. But that's not true. God is God. The meaning of God means all powerful. Nobody's greater than him. Nobody's equal than him. See, so there is a logical flaw there in itself. So we understand that God is great and he has inconceivable energies by which he acts.
In Vedic literatures, there is information of a material object called a touch stone, which simply by touch can transform iron into gold. The touchstone can produce an unlimited quantity of gold and yet remain unchanged. Only in the state of ignorance can one accept the Mayavad conclusion that this cosmic manifestation and the living entities are false or illusion. No sane man would attempt to impose ignorance and illusion upon the Supreme Absolute Truth, who is absolute in everything. There is no possibility of change, ignorance, or illusion in him. The Supreme Brahman, the Supreme Absolute Truth, is transcendental, completely different from all material conceptions and full of inconceivable potencies. The Svetasvara Upanishad confirms that Supreme Absolute Personality of Godhead is full of inconceivable energies and that no one can else possess such energies.
Again, we are trying to understand the same thing. Lord Chaitanya is repeating it in so many different ways for us to understand. God has many inconceivable energies. And we, the living entity, is one of his energy. This material world is one of his energy. The spiritual world is another energy. You know, because if we think that, oh, God is in ignorance, then we are being ignorant. We are being foolish. How can God be in ignorance? Means then ignorance is greater than God. That means ignorance is God. You know, like A is equal to B, and then B is equal to C, so A is equal to C, something like that. But no, how can ignorance be God then? You know, or if God is in illusion, that means illusion is greater than God. That means illusion is God. But that's not true, right? Only God is God. So again, we come to understand that we can easily understand God is a person and he has many energies. Do you all want to, is there any question or comments or?
No, it's clear.
Okay. Okay.
It is only by misunderstanding the inconceivable energy of the Supreme that one may conclude that the Supreme Absolute Truth is impersonal. Such a deluded conclusion is experienced by a living entity when he is in an acute stage of disease. In Srimad Bhagavatam 3.33.3, there is a clear statement that the Supreme Atma, the Lord, has inconceivable and innumerable potencies. It is also stated in Brahma Samhita 5.5 that the Supreme Spirit has many variegated and inconceivable energies. Nor should one think that there is any possibility of ignorance existing in the absolute truth. Ignorance and knowledge are conceptions in this world of duality, but in the absolute, there cannot be any ignorance. It is simply foolishness to consider that the absolute is covered by ignorance. If the absolute truth could be covered by ignorance, how could it be said to be absolute?
That's what we were just saying, right? How can God be in ignorance? How? It's not possible.
Yeah. That means then he's
And
not God. If he's in ignorance, if somebody's in
yeah,
ignorance, then they're not God.
yeah. That means then ignorance is God. If we say that
Yeah.
God is in ignorance, means ignorance is greater than God, that means ignorance is God. But then that's not true. That's
Yeah.
completely, yeah, it's not true. So,
Yeah.
by word jugglery, what happens is we just confuse ourselves as to the position of Krishna. But if we actually hear the scriptures, hear the Vedas, then we can understand very easily our position of Krishna, and the position of this material world. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, no? So many times he says, this Devi Esha Gunamai, she's my energy. The living entities, Mama Vamsa Jiva Loke, Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. The living entities are my energy. He says, I'm the source of the material and spiritual worlds. He keeps repeating, keeps saying the same thing, to help us understand his position, our position, the position of this material energy. So we'll stop here for today. Thank you so much for listening and joining in. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.